In the summer of 1392, a shocking event unfolded in the heart of France that would forever change the course of its history. King Charles VI, known to his people as Charles the Well-Beloved, suddenly lost his mind on a dusty road in the forest of Mans. This event marked the beginning of a series of tragic and bizarre episodes that would plunge France into a period of turmoil and chaos, a period later known as the Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death. On a scorching August day, the king, along with his uncles and other nobles, was leading a military campaign against the Duke of Brittany. The Duke, a powerful and influential figure, had refused to surrender Pierre de Craon, the man who had attempted to assassinate the king's chief military advisor, Olivier de Clisson. The king was determined to bring the Duke to justice, and despite his recent illness, he insisted on leading the army himself. As the royal party passed through the forest of Mans, a strange man appeared from behind a tree. He was barefoot, dressed in rags, and his eyes were wild with a haunting intensity. He grabbed the king's horse by the bridle and shouted, "Ride no further, noble king, turn back. You are betrayed." The king, already on edge, shrank back in fear. His escorts quickly pushed the man away, but the damage was done. The king was visibly shaken, and the ominous words echoed in his mind. The party continued, but soon after, a simple accident set off a chain of events that would have catastrophic consequences. One of the king's pages, drowsy from the heat, accidentally dropped the king's lance. The lance clattered against the helmet carried by another page, producing a loud, metallic clang. The sound was like a trigger for the king. He suddenly drew his sword and, with a manic cry, charged at his own men, shouting, "Forward against the traitors! They wish to deliver me to the enemy." In a frenzy, the king struck out at anyone within reach. The nobles, caught off guard, could only defend themselves, but they dared not strike back against their sovereign. The king's brother, Louis of Orleans, and the Duke of Burgundy tried to calm him, but their efforts were in vain. The king's rage was uncontrollable, and he continued his wild attack until he was exhausted and collapsed on the ground, panting and drenched in sweat. The scene was one of utter chaos and horror. The king lay motionless, staring blankly, as if he had been transformed into a lifeless statue. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. He did not recognize anyone, not even his closest advisors. The nobles, shocked and frightened, realized that something had gone terribly wrong. The king, the very symbol of their nation, had gone mad. The news of the king's madness spread like wildfire through the kingdom. People were terrified and dismayed. Some believed it was a divine punishment, a sign that God was angry with France. Others whispered of sorcery and poison, convinced that someone had cast a spell on the king or laced his food with some deadly potion. The public demanded answers, and the nobles, fearing a backlash, quickly convened a formal inquiry to investigate the incident. The king's doctors, who had been summoned from all over the kingdom, examined him but could offer no hope. They were baffled by his condition and admitted that their knowledge of medicine was powerless to help. The king remained in a coma for 4 days, and many believed he was on the verge of death. The people of France, who had loved their king, were devastated. They wept and prayed, hoping that their beloved sovereign would recover, but the king's madness was just the beginning. Over the next few years, Charles VI would experience repeated episodes of mental illness, each one more severe than the last. During these episodes, he would forget who he was, fail to recognize his own family, and sometimes even attack those around him. The royal court became a place of constant tension and fear. The king's condition made it impossible for him to rule effectively, and the country began to drift into a state of disarray. The king's uncles, the Dukes of Burgundy and Berry, saw an opportunity to seize power. They had always been jealous of the influence wielded by the king's advisors, particularly Olivier de Clisson, the Constable of France. Clisson, who had survived the assassination attempt, was a powerful and respected figure, and he had the king's trust. The uncles, however, saw him as a threat to their own ambitions and began to plot against him. The Duke of Brittany, who had already been involved in the assassination attempt, was also a key player in the political drama. He had his own reasons for wanting to see Clisson removed from power. The Duke of Brittany and the uncles formed an alliance, and they began to work together to undermine Clisson's position. They spread rumors and accusations, trying to turn the king and his advisors against him. The situation was further complicated by the ongoing war with England. The English, who had been negotiating with France for a peace treaty, saw the king's madness as a sign of weakness and an opportunity to gain more concessions. The French, divided and leaderless, found it increasingly difficult to present a united front. The truce that had been agreed upon was extended again and again, but a lasting peace remained elusive. The king's madness had far-reaching consequences for France. It weakened the monarchy and created a power vacuum that the nobles were quick to exploit. The country became a battleground for competing interests, and the people suffered as a result. The economy struggled, taxes increased, and the common folk faced increasing hardship. The once proud Kingdom of France was on the brink of collapse. The king's condition also had a profound impact on his family. His wife, Queen Isabeau of Bavaria, was left to manage the royal household and the affairs of the court. She was a strong-willed woman, but the task of keeping the kingdom together was overwhelming. The king's children, including the future Charles VII, grew up in a world of uncertainty and danger. They were often used as pawns in the political games played by the nobles, and their safety was never guaranteed. The king's episodes of madness were unpredictable and frightening. One moment, he would be lucid and able to carry out his duties, and the next, he would be in the grip of a delusion. During one particularly severe episode, he became convinced that he was made of glass and would shatter if he was touched. He refused to move and would not allow anyone to come near him. His advisors and family members were at a loss, and the kingdom continued to suffer. Despite the king's condition, the nobles and advisors continued to struggle for power. The Duke of Burgundy, who had initially tried to calm the situation, began to see the king's madness as an opportunity to expand his own influence. He formed an alliance with the English and began to plot against the king's brother, Louis of Orleans. The Duke of Orleans, who had been a close advisor to the king, became a target of the Duke of Burgundy's ambitions. The tensions between the two dukes eventually led to a full-scale civil war. The war, known as the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War, lasted for decades and further weakened the kingdom. The people of France, already burdened by the king's madness and the ongoing war with England, now faced the additional horrors of internal conflict. The countryside was ravaged by battles, and towns were destroyed. The people suffered the most, and many lost their lives or their homes. The king's madness also had a profound impact on the church. The Pope and the church hierarchy saw the king's condition as a reflection of the moral and spiritual decay of the kingdom. They called for a crusade to purify the land and restore order. However, the crusade never materialized, and the church's influence waned as the kingdom descended into chaos. The king's condition also affected international relations. Other European powers, such as Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, saw the king's madness as a sign of weakness and began to take advantage of the situation. They formed alliances and made territorial claims, further isolating France and weakening its position on the continent. In the end, the king's madness had a lasting impact on the history of France. The kingdom emerged from the period weaker and more divided than ever before. The nobles had gained more power, and the central authority of the monarchy had been severely undermined. The people of France had suffered greatly, and the country was left to rebuild and recover from the years of turmoil and chaos. The story of King Charles VI and the Danse Macabre is a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of a nation to the person of its leader. It shows how a single individual's mental health can have far-reaching consequences for an entire country. It is a reminder of the importance of strong, stable leadership and the dangers of allowing power to be concentrated in the hands of a few. The king's madness may have been a tragedy, but it also serves as a powerful lesson. It reminds us that the well-being of a nation depends on the well-being of its leaders, and that the health and stability of a society are closely linked to the health and stability of those who govern it. The events of 1392 and the years that followed are a stark reminder of the fragility of power and the importance of responsibility and leadership.